Welcome to the Quotive Corner. Today's quote is one of those compact, well-crafted observations that sounds like it belongs on a needlepoint pillow, until you actually think about what it's asking of you. Because what it's asking is harder than it looks. Tact is the knack of making a point without making an enemy. That comes from Howard W. Newton, an American advertising executive and writer who published the line in Redbook magazine in August 1946. Newton isn't a household name, which is part of the attribution story worth mentioning briefly. This quote has traveled under several names over the decades, most notably Isaac Newton, simply because a 1964 newspaper credited it to Newton without a first name, and the confusion cascaded from there. Howard W. Newton is the verified originator documented to the primary source. He was in the business of persuasion for a living, which makes it fitting that his most enduring contribution is a line about how to persuade people without alienating them. So, the quote, "The word that does the most work here is knack, not skill, not technique, not discipline. Knack, which implies something subtler than a learnable procedure. A knack is a feel for something, an intuitive sensitivity to context, timing, and the particular person in front of you. You can study communication all you want, but tact isn't primarily a set of rules. It's a practiced attunement to human dynamics that develops slowly, through experience and honest self-examination, and that looks effortless in the people who have actually built it. The definition itself is worth examining more carefully. Making a point without making an enemy. Two things happening simultaneously, and the tension between them is the whole challenge. Because making a point effectively usually requires clarity, directness, and sometimes the willingness to say something the other person doesn't want to hear. And making an enemy is what happens when that clarity arrives without enough regard for how it lands. The tactful person has to hold both requirements at once. Be honest and be careful. Be direct and be kind. Say the true thing in a way that doesn't slam a door. Think about how often those two requirements pull against each other in ordinary life. The performance review that needs to address a real problem without destroying someone's motivation. The friendship where something genuinely hurtful needs to be named without nuking the relationship. The family dinner where a disagreement is real, but the relationship is more important than winning the argument. The workplace where you need to push back on your manager's idea without making yourself the difficult one. In every case, you have a point that deserves to be made and a relationship that deserves to survive the making of it. Recall from one of our prior episodes where we discussed Lao Tzu, who observed that he who knows does not speak, and he who speaks does not know, pointing at the relationship between genuine depth and the compulsion to perform it. There's a related idea embedded in Newton's definition of tact. The person who has no filter, who says whatever they think whenever they think it and calls it honesty, they're not brave. They're unfinished. Real honesty, the kind that's actually useful rather than just satisfying to deliver, requires the additional work of figuring out how to say the true thing in a way the other person can actually receive. An undeliverable truth helps no one. Voltaire gave us the companion observation in another prior episode, that not everything true needs to be said. That judgment about when and whether to speak is part of wisdom. Newton is making the next layer of that argument. When you do speak, how you say it matters as much as what you say. The content of the point and the manner of its delivery are not separable. A true thing communicated poorly can do more damage than silence. A true thing communicated with care can change someone's mind, repair a relationship, or redirect a situation entirely. Robert Frost defined education as the ability to listen to almost anything without losing your temper or your self-confidence. Tact is the giving side of that same quality. The educated listener can receive hard things without defensive collapse. The tactful speaker can deliver hard things without triggering it. Both require the same underlying discipline, a genuine awareness of the other person as a full human being whose dignity matters, whose reaction is predictable and worth accounting for, and whose capacity to hear something difficult is real, but not unlimited. This is where tact connects directly to what John Wooden pointed at with character versus reputation. The person who is tactful primarily to manage how they're perceived, who calculates their delivery to avoid consequences rather than to genuinely serve the other person, is performing tact rather than practicing it. Real tact comes from actually caring how the other person receives what you're saying. It comes from the interior work of holding their perspective alongside your own, which is harder and rarer than it sounds. Now, the honest counterpoint, because this show doesn't skip it. Tact can be misused as a cover for cowardice. There are people who dress up avoidance as diplomacy, who never quite say the difficult thing, who soften every observation until the real content has been sanded away entirely, who mistake conflict avoidance for social grace. That's not tact. That's a failure to make the point at all, dressed up in polite clothing. Newton's definition is clear. The point still has to be made. Tact is about how, not whether. And there are situations where directness, even bluntness, is the more respectful choice, where softening a message so thoroughly that the other person doesn't actually receive it serves nobody. The surgeon who needs to tell a patient the diagnosis clearly, the coach who needs a player to understand that their current approach isn't working, the friend who needs to be told something they genuinely don't want to hear before it costs them something they can't get back. In those moments, tact means finding the clearest, most humane way to say the hard thing, not avoiding it. The goal is never to make the point disappear. The goal is to make it land. And that, in the end, is what the knack is for. Not to make conversations easier by making them emptier, but to make difficult conversations productive by making them human. To say the real thing in a way that opens a door rather than closing one. To be the kind of person that hard truths can travel through without blowing up the relationship they're traveling in. Howard W. Newton made his living convincing people of things. He understood, professionally and probably personally, that persuasion without rapport is just noise, and that the fastest way to make someone unreachable is to make them defensive. Tact is the investment you make in keeping the channel open, even when what you're sending through it is something the other person didn't ask for. Thanks for spending a few minutes here at the Quotive Corner. If this one made you think of a conversation you've been avoiding, or one you've had that landed harder than you intended, ponder that for a moment. And as always, remember that wisdom isn't in the quote, it's in the reflection. Looking forward to seeing you in the next episode.